Well, let's talk about the distancing measures because I was thinking about talking to you this morning, and I take the tube in. I take the Northern Line in every day, and there I am sitting next to people. So like I would in a theater, everyone's wearing a mask, but we're in this compartment. It's maybe 100 people in there, 150 people on there, going on a journey that could be 30 minutes or an hour and a half. A few weeks ago, I went to Turkey on holiday, 4-hour flight. We're all in a plane, all with masks on, 200 people for 4 hours, which probably is a lot like watching something in the West End. That's sanctioned. And yet we can't do the same for an industry that's 2.7 billion pounds. So again, when you look at those comparisons, does it frustrate you, or do you say to the government, how can we try to move to something that makes it, more viable? Because again, there's a real industry at place here, and I want to ask you the question later of what does London look like if our cultural venues disappear, and I want to get to that later, but assuming we don't want that to happen, how do we move forward there? And when you have discussions with government, what do they say to that?
Well, they're perhaps understandably really, really cautious. In the first barrier was their fear around the interaction between performers on stage and an audience. And so for a while they were saying, if you're singing, you need to be at least 3 meters apart from any other performer. Well, that's not going to work. So they've calmed down about that, and they've accepted our proposals around saying, well, what about putting performers into bubbles? So they can actually touch each other and be close to each other on stage, because you can't have a love scene, or a fight scene without the actors breaching the 1 meter, 2 meter rule. Right. So they've accepted that. We can now have actors on stage performing in pretty normal ways. You take out the first row of the audience so that they're not too close to the stage, so that if there's any spittle coming from the stage, it doesn't hit the audience, all that kind of thing. But yeah, we are frustrated as an industry as to why it is that you can sit in a plane for 2, 3, 4 hours with no social distancing and just a mask on. The explanation that's been given to us is to do with ventilation. So aeroplanes have individual ventilation units for each person. So although the air is recirculated and purified, it doesn't go from one person to another. I'm not entirely sure of the science on that, but other colleagues of mine who are more knowledgeable about this side are looking into that. So we're working really hard on ventilation. So looking at the ventilation systems that theatres have, putting in place what are called HEPA filters, which filter out all the viruses, essentially, a whole bunch of technology solutions that could make it more possible. We're also looking at exactly how the 1 meter plus rule could be applied in theatres. There's no agreed arrangement at the moment, so each theatre is interpreting it in their own way. So some theatres are being quite cautious, and they're saying it's 1 meter that way, it's 1 meter that way, it's 1 meter behind me, and it's 1 meter diagonal. Which means that not only do you have to have gaps between groups of people on a row, you have to have gaps between rows. That's how you get down to such low numbers. Right. What we're trying to say to government is, let's make it 1 meter between people in rows, but not within a row, but not row to row. Because let's face it, we're all facing in the same direction. I'm looking at the back of someone else's head. So, I'm not going to be, they're not going to be breathing in my air. If we were able to do that, not eliminate each other every other row, and have people maybe 1 or 2 seats apart, then we'd be able to get up to 60-70%, still with a form of social distancing. And we'd have all the other hygiene measures, masks and one-way systems and sanitizer and all the other things that you've seen in shops and restaurants already. So we're hoping
that would be a game changer.
It would be a game changer.
That would turn potentially most of the industry right back on.
Yeah.
And you'd see all the ancillary economic benefits that go with that, and cultural benefits.
Well, the ancillary economic benefits you were asking me about, what happens to cities like London or towns like Manchester or Birmingham. As you know, they're dead right now, and the restaurants and bars rely on the theatre sector as a way of generating revenue and income. So we know from research that outside of the West End, for every £1 that someone spends on a theatre ticket, they spend about £11 going to the pub or going to a restaurant or on transport to get in and out of town. Wow. In the West End, it's £83.
For every pound spent?
Because of the number of tourists coming. You've got hotel stays, you've got a whole bunch of other stuff that makes that 1:83 ratio in the West End. So it's not just important for the theatre industry, it's important for our towns and cities. We know that, notwithstanding what's been happening with Brexit, retail is dead on its feet and will continue in that direction with the increase in online retail, out-of-town shopping. So what are we going to do to animate our town centres and our city centres if it's not culture and leisure? Those have got to be at the heart of the recovery.
It's so strange though, and yet it's not the most obvious thing you think of. And I went to see Death of a Salesman in Piccadilly Circus, I think earlier this year. Wendell Pierce, the guy from The Wire, was there. It was amazing.
Fantastic, yeah.
I saw, I think, the last performance. They were hugging on stage. I was like, wow, it was the last performance. It was incredible. And it was electric, and we were in Piccadilly, and it was packed, and people are out, and of course, you have the dinner before, and then the drinks afterwards, like you said, the train tickets, and there was definitely people that traveled to see him, even probably internationally to see that. But you forget somehow that it's a big draw, and it powers the economy in a way. You think sometimes that culture, it's something that would be nice to have. It's nice to have the museum, but it's not an essential service. But it actually is to a city centre.
It certainly is. I mean, even before this all happened, we spent a lot of our time at the Theatres Trust helping people not only stay open, but help people reopen theatres that have fallen empty and have fallen into disuse. And it's, over the last 10, 12 years, we've managed to reopen 80 theatres. And part of the reason for that is because of that local economic impact. So to give you two examples, there's a massive theatre called the Bradford Odeon, which the local council have decided to put money into reopening because they know it will reanimate Bradford Town Centre. And that's going to reopen as a music venue. The NEC group, the people who run the exhibition centre in Birmingham, are going to run it. Similarly, in Stockton in the northeast, which is a pretty deprived part of the UK, the local authority are investing in reopening the Stockton Globe, also as a music venue, to be run by the Ambassadors Theatre Group. And they've done it, or they're doing it, because it will be tens of millions of pounds going into the local economy. So, one of the things that we're saying to government, quite apart from support the sector needs right now, when it comes to the recovery and the investment that Johnson wants to make into infrastructure and building, that should also go into theatre buildings. Because for every pound you spend on reopening a theatre building or improving it, making it more attractive, providing more kind of community spaces, for every pound you spend, you get about £150 back in terms of value. So it's pretty important.
How come that's lost in conversation though? Because I haven't heard it mentioned once in the past 4 months.
Yeah, I suppose I'm in a bit of a bubble, as people are when they work in a particular sector. So it feels like we have been talking about it all those times. And in fairness, in fairness to the government, our current culture minister does get it. He does understand the importance of culture, and I think Sunak does as well. I'm disappointed that he hasn't done a culture-specific intervention just now. But we should remember that he did come up with £1.57 billion in extra support for the sector. We don't know quite how that's going to land yet because it's still being dispersed.
Right.
So Arts Council England, who are one of the main bodies that are going to disperse the vast majority of this money, they're going to, I think they've had about 4,000 applications for funding. So what's clear is that there will be winners and losers. Not every single theatre or museum or gallery, because it's across all the arts, not just theatres. Not all of them are going to be able to get the support they want. I reckon probably they'll have a 1 in 4 success rate in terms of people getting support. So we'll know about that in the next week or two, actually. So okay. I think the next couple of weeks or next month is going to be pretty crucial because we'll start to see whether or not the new jobs support scheme is going to be effective in terms of supporting theatres. And B, we'll see which ones don't get the money from the government, from the 1.57 billion. So although we've only had 6 closures so far, I'm anticipating more theatres closing over time and more redundancies as well.